The South African Football Association has just concluded a briefing on the latest with Bafana Bafana coaching department. Well, actually, we'll just get a confirmation on whether or not that actually is done or if it's still underway. And for that update, let's touch base with our sports reporter, Minenhle Hlela, who's covering the story for us. A very good afternoon to you, Minenhle. I'm sure yourself, a lot of sports journalists and a lot of sporting fans are waiting with bated breath to find out whether any names have been released thus far and if the meeting has indeed concluded. Where are we?
Afternoon, Tammy. Afternoon to the viewers. Yes, I'm out here at SAFA House, and currently the SAFA Technical Committee is currently in the meeting. Now, the whole purpose of this meeting is to finalize the candidates that they will hand over to the SAFA NEC, and from those candidates, they will be then picking the person who will be taking over the Bafana Bafana position. Fans, though, will have to wait just a bit longer because SAFA CEO Tebogo Motlanthe was in that meeting also, or is in that meeting, and he confirmed to us that they're hoping to have a new coach by the end of the month. So fans, end of the month, they can expect a new coach. So now what they're currently doing is trying to finalize those candidates. They've decided that they're going to go with 3 candidates, and they're trying to find those 3 candidates who will then be facing the NEC in a form of an interview, and they'll then those specific candidates then will have to prove of why they're deserving to take over the Bafana Bafana position.
Of those 3 candidates,
well, Tommy, they've been very cagey about it, and I think it's something that you get used to when you come down to SAFA. They wouldn't give any specific names, specific nationalities, or where they come from, or anything of that nature. All we got from the technical committee is that they have 3 candidates in mind, which then they're hopefully trying to push forward to the NEC. But there's also a presentation that must take place, that must happen, of why the technical committee has decided that these 3 candidates, one of them is the perfect man to take over the Bafana Bafana job, or take the Bafana Bafana coaching reins. They looked at certain things like he has to have be able to have good relationships with the PSL, because obviously the bulk of players that will make up his team will come from the PSL. His relationships with the Banyana coach, Desiree Ellis, under 17, under 20 and under 23 coach. So they must have some sort of very good understanding of how South African football runs and the problems and the difficulties that they might have. One problem that he will have to face, and we saw it with the Molefe Nteke before he departed, COVID-19, the difficulties where you have to work around that, because we saw with Molefe Nteke he couldn't have most of his European players in the mix, because South Africa, obviously in the UK and some countries in Europe, are in that red list of countries that if you should come from South Africa, you'll need a 14-day quarantine session. Now, for players who come all the way down to South Africa and back to Europe, that 14 days quarantine then compromises their position in their respective clubs. And that's why we saw the likes of Bongani Zungu, Keegan Dolly, who chose not to come and play in South Africa against those crucial AFCON qualifiers for the 21 edition against Sudan and against Ghana, and they rather chose that because of the situation, they'll rather stay in Europe. So that's one big major issue that they'll have to deal with going forward, knowing that South Africa, there's a possibility of a 3rd wave coming, and you know what kind of lockdowns will then be implemented by the government, and also just how other governments will deal with the situation, knowing that South Africa has already gone through a variant COVID-19 situation. So there's a lot of factors that will have to be going into whoever's selected to actually think about, and the right candidate, and how they can take Bafana Bafana forward. Obviously, the big one obviously will be trying to qualify for Qatar, the World Cup, which is happening next year, and that will be their #1 issue, to try their level best to ensure that we are able to be in Qatar. It's going to be a bit difficult timing, because if SAFA has indicated that they're going to only name the coach at the end of this month, the qualifiers start in June, so they have very little time to try and get a team together, to try and get the right players, the right mix, and for the players to understand their philosophy and their game plans. But they're hoping that they're going to be able to do that, or the SAFA says they're going to support the coach in every single way possible to try and make sure that we're able to qualify for Qatar 2022. But they're also trying to expand their plan. So it's not only about Qatar, it's the AFCONs that will come out. I mean, the AFCON qualifiers that will come up next. Obviously, we're not in Cameroon next year, so it's looking at the next edition of the African Cup of Nations, and also looking at the 2026 FIFA World Cup.
Well, I want to ask you to put your neck up there and perhaps gaze into your own crystal ball there, Minenhle. You mentioned quite a few criteria that were important. For example, having great relationships with the PSL, having a good relationships with the Bafana Bafana coach, knowing how South African football runs. Do you think that this will be a South African coach or perhaps somebody from outside?
Look, Tammy, it will make sense under the circumstances right now, especially thinking of Qatar 2022 and the qualifiers that are coming up. It will be best to go down that route. But with SAFA, the SAFA technical team saying it won't be a train smash if we do not qualify for Qatar 2024. Obviously looking the time that is there to prepare a team. So if the major factor of qualifying, SAFA, they're saying it's not a major issue, but they would like to, to give their absolute best in trying to make sure they qualify. So common knowledge will tell you maybe then it's best to go with the local coach. We know Benny McCarthy's name has continuously been thrown in the hat. Benny himself has publicly come out, said he doesn't think he's quite ready and maybe this is not quite the time to actually go into it. So that will mean that SAFA might then decide to bring in somebody who's already been there. We've seen the number of times how Sheikh Mashaba has come in and he's been brought in. Stuart Baxter has had two stints also. But, would he be also a candidate that will actually be put forward in mind of trying to, qualify for the World Cup or giving everything to try and qualify for the World Cup? We also had a name of Carlos Queiroz. You remember him back in 2002. He made sure that we qualified for Korea and Japan. He took us to the quarterfinals of the African Cup of Nations back then. He had a great understanding of South African football, even left a document to the SAFA executive on how best they can take, South African football, not only from a national men's team perspective, but also look at the women's game and the juniors and how they can all be put together into a line. So there's some sort of synergy that happens and there's progress and there's World Cup qualifiers. South Africa is there, whether it's the juniors and the women's. We are able to rise in the world rankings and also the CAF rankings. So knowledge will tell you it has to be somebody who understands South African football.
And on that note,
how do we know if they might decide that makes?
I think we'll just have to wait and see on that note. But a lot of justification for why it could be a South African. So we'll wait to see just how good his guess is.